Welcome everybody to this edition of Attention Talk Video. I'm your host, ADHD and Attention Coach Jeff Copper, and we're here today with Dr. Mark Burton talking about mindfulness. Dr. Burton, welcome to the show.
Good to be back. Thank you.
I'm just a coach. This is the smart guy. He is Mr. Mindfulness in mindful practice and everything. And I've learned a lot from him and others with regard to this, particularly when it comes to ADHD. And for those who follow anything that I do, I'm a big fan of Dr. Barkley's view of ADHD as an executive function, or really self-regulation is really the epicenter of it. And he talks about the automatic brain and the executive functioning brain, and the executive functioning brain having to pause and effortlessly, and I want to underscore the word effortlessly, override that automatic response. And so I wanted to talk to you today about that concept and why mindfulness practice is so important for those with ADHD, because if you don't stop and pause, that automatic brain just kind of sends you through it. But if you can build the skill of pausing and overriding to catch yourself, it can be transformational, and one of the roads to do that is really mindfulness. So you want to speak to that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think just to kind of normalize things, put them in the, this is actually something everybody works on in life, right? It isn't like it may be more of a challenge in ADHD sometimes, but this concept that left on autopilot, most of us live our lives just plowing through things. We're sort of here and our minds are somewhere else. We're doing a radio show and something at home is still distracting us, or whatever it is. Like, our minds never stay totally still. The problem is that when we're living that way, we're kind of automatically just in reactive mode. And often if we're stressed, it does mean that sort of more basal brain is just taken over. So that can just drive life. And really, almost by definition, if we're not giving things our full attention, we're sort of living by habit. We're not really, thinking at all about maybe doing something a little differently, or why this situation requires something else, or whether we're even capable of doing something different at all. So the basic mindfulness practice, is just what you're describing. Like, for a few minutes, what you're practicing is, you're safe, you're sitting there, and you may feel restless, you may feel anxious, there may be something bothering you, and then you just come back to something kind of neutral that isn't loaded and emotional. I mean, the whole premise of a mindfulness practice, for example, where you focus on breathing, isn't that there's anything unique about breathing, and you're not even really trying to become less stressed. It's just something to focus on that isn't all the stuff that's getting you stressed. And then, as you described it, that's exactly it. You're just creating space. You're just sort of practicing something's there, and you're not going to react to it immediately.
I know there's been a couple times where I've laid down to go to bed and I'm worrying about something tonight, and I will spend the time and focus in on my breath. And what I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to crowd out the thoughts and the worry to calm down, to go to sleep. And I've done that over the years, and it's a practice. I'm trying to be conscious, and I'm actually willfully trying to shift my attention in that moment so I can calm down and go to sleep. You want to comment on that?
I mean, there's a couple of things I would say. I mean, one is that mindfulness practice is about just seeing what's going on, in essence, and sort of changing how we're thinking about things, changing how we're doing things. So you're not actually trying to crowd out anything, but you're trying to get less caught up in it.
Yep.
And so mindfulness, actually, sleep is a huge issue in ADHD, and I think that often comes down to you're got a busy mind, and maybe a restless, you're physically restless, and now you're supposed to just sort of lie there long enough for your brain to shut off. And it's so easy to, in that moment, fall into habits that mess with your sleep more. They can be literal habits, so that, like screen time messes with sleep, but you get into that lifetime habit of just watching TV until you finally are tired enough to fall asleep. Or it can be mental habit of as soon as you lie there, it's totally normal that your anxiety just kind of takes over. So actually, an introduction to mindfulness practice for many adults, and it's a great introduction for kids too, is it's like you're giving the mind something else to do. And in this case, what it is you get all caught up in thought, and then you practice coming back to just the breath, because it turns out the breath is really boring and not that exciting, and it's not going to cause more anxiety usually for most of us. And you just practice that over and over again, and your mind starts to settle, because again, left unattended, things often just take off on their own. So it's like a bad thought leads to more anxiety, and more anxiety leads to more bad thoughts, and then you start worrying about the next day and the next day and the next day, and all you're doing is kind of breaking that cycle. And just over time, it becomes more habitual to catch yourself a little earlier and come back sooner.
Again, regulate those thoughts and stuff to more purposely kind of go forward.
Yep.
You made a comment that was interesting. We were talking about focusing on your breath being kind of boring.
Yeah.
and we've talked about mindfulness in a fitness contest
Right.
text, and being an athlete and talking a lot about exercise, I found that exercise is a repetitive and boring routine task, which is very much a challenge for those with ADHD. And so when I look at mindfulness as a fitness type exercise and these things, and this being boring, that's an epicenter because it's hard for those with ADHD.
Absolutely.
So it's really good for you, but it's really hard because you have to schedule the time, or you have to willfully do this and sit down and make this thing happen. And
Yes.
so I don't want to minimize it. It's not like you can do this in 2 seconds, but I want to meet you where you are so that you know what's kind of coming. And if you struggle with it, that you realize it's not easy for those with ADHD to motivate you to continue.
Well, I think there's actually there's another layer to that too, which is, first of all, this came up recently somewhere else too. It's important to recognize that for any mindfulness class I'm aware of, session 2 is usually about problem solving why it didn't happen like anyone expected, like no one stuck to it. So it isn't unique to ADHD. And part of getting started with mindfulness for anybody is just putting aside perfectionism. I mean, if you expect to be, have this totally still mind at any point, if you expect to be more relaxed like day 3, it's probably not going to happen. So you need to just recognize that like your mind's busy, and that's normal, and that's true for everybody, and all of that's fine. And then like Jeff said, it is definitely about consistency, and it's not always exciting, and that's a challenge. There's no doubt that's a challenge. But one thing I would also reflect on is some of the stuff you're kind of working with, even in getting a mindfulness practice started, often reflects on real life challenges. And that's just, so that's the stuff that makes you distracted while you're just sitting there is probably distracting you in real life too. And the challenges to getting started with mindfulness practice are probably reflecting real life too. It's all part of the same,
Absolutely.
Like, this is the stuff you're working on in life, and that's just the reality of it.
Absolutely. So in summary, I really just kind of want to emphasize is that this concept is a little foreign and a little fuzzy for a lot of people out there, but if you begin to think of it as a fitness exercise that you do to build the ability to engage that executive functioning mind, to override the automatic right, I think that you can begin to see why this is so good for those with ADHD, but also acknowledge that it's harder for you to do this because you're bombarded with thoughts and it's relatively boring. So it's not an easy thing to do, but I think that just by understanding the concept here, it can be hugely beneficial. Any last things to add before we wrap it up?
No, I think that was a great summary. I mean, this is stuff that's been really shown to be useful in multiple settings. It's been studied with ADHD, and like Jeff said, it's just something to get started. The basic concept is like the old commercial. If you want to come back to sports, of just do it. You just got to get started, practice it for a while, and then see what happens. Yeah,
and form the habit. So.
There you go.
Dr. Burton, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you again. It was great. Thanks so much.
I hope you've enjoyed this edition. Please catch us next week for another great edition of Attention Talk Video, and also hit our subscribe button down here where you'll get emails of our weekly tips. Take care.